Brought to you by Maybank.
Hi everyone, I'm at SGX to meet up with Thilan Wickramasinghe, Head of Research Singapore with Maybank IBG Research. We're here to discuss a trending topic, the growth of electric vehicles and its impact on the environment and society. And here he is, Thilan. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely amazing to be here, Rene.
I tell you what, Thilan, the weather's looking a bit bad. Let's head on over to my office to continue our discussion.
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Well, Thilan, welcome to my office.
It's a wonderful office.
Here on Rev, we love to take our office outdoors. I hope you're comfortable. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, as mentioned, we're talking about a really interesting subject, EVs. And as of late, I've actually been doing a number of episodes as well on electric vehicles. Because in terms of curiosity and knowledge, I think it's still, for a lot of people, it's still in its infancy stage. People are not really familiar with a lot of EVs, which is the reason why I'm glad that you came on board here to answer a lot of, I think, very relevant questions about EV. Alright, so here goes. The very first questions are EVs reaching a tipping point?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Rene. So I think if you really look at it, between 2016 and 2020, on an annualized basis, EV sales have actually been growing at about 43%. That's a phenomenal number. And I think if you go to 2030, for every internal combustion engine car or a regular car, there'll be an EV sold. And by 2035, we expect that there'll be more EVs being sold than regular cars. So, and if you actually go a little bit further to 2050, which is actually not that far away, 85% of the vehicle market share will be EVs. So, when you really think about it, EVs are becoming cheaper and cheaper. The technology is getting better and better, and there are economies of scale being achieved. So I think we are definitely at that tipping point.
Globally, if you're looking at places like Europe and everywhere else, EVs are really being adopted by a lot of countries like Europe. They're giving a lot of rebates in the sense that if you go within the CBD, you don't have to pay the taxes and everything else. So it's and that's a lot of encouragement globally. I think for everybody to go green, not only in the sense of driving EVs, but also the environment as well. But here in Singapore, I guess it still hasn't really caught on from what I've seen. I mean, people have been buying EVs, but I think, like you said, maybe the pricing is still not still not affordable yet because due to, as you mentioned, economies of scale. There's still not much demand, so brands can't really give you a really good bargain at the moment. All right. So now to my next question: why are EVs important?
I think they're a very important tool, Rene, when it comes to decarbonization and reducing emissions, especially in support of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, if you remember, the Paris Climate Agreement wants to keep global temperatures from rising not more than 2 degrees Celsius, right? I mean, that's a huge undertaking, and that will require current greenhouse gas emissions to fall anywhere between 42 to 47% by 2050. And even if you take a small country like Singapore, 15% of Singapore's emissions are from land transport. So if you want to support the targets that are set by the Paris Climate Agreement, we'll have to either travel less or find alternative ways to travel which emit less greenhouse gases, and EVs are one of those one of the tools for that.
Right. I guess in the biggest sense of the picture is about trying to lessen your carbon footprint in globally in terms of emission gases and everything. And we see that effect already in places like Netherlands, where they were seeing rising water levels and they're trying to make the dams a bit higher. And even in Singapore, I believe the government is also talking about they're also planning about building dikes and everything to protect the shores of Singapore. Okay. And next questions: how will EV adoption accelerate what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's three sort of drivers in my view, right? So, I mean, if you really look at it, one of the biggest things that's kind of holding EV back is range anxiety, which is basically the fear that you will run out of charge before you actually get to your end destination.
I always talk about that in videos.
Exactly. But I mean, you also would have noticed, right, the cars that you're reviewing, right, the range has actually been increasing over time.
Exactly.
And I think what's even more important is if you look at government as well as private sector initiatives, there's a lot more investments going into the charging infrastructure. So the charging infrastructure now is becoming much more wider. There was recently a Singaporean and Malaysian venture that they're actually looking to put charging infrastructure all the way from Singapore to Penang, for instance, right? So I think that's one of the key things that will help EVs accelerate. But also, I think it will be the cost factor, right? I think battery costs are falling, and that will make EVs more affordable. I think the energy to or power to cost ratio of a lithium-ion battery versus internal combustion engine will be fairly similar by 2025. So that's only like 3 years from now.
Exactly.
So I think that will also make EVs a lot more affordable. And I think the final sort of driver will be the fact that mindsets are changing. So there was a very recent poll which showed that for millennials and Gen Zs, 2/3 of them will actually consider an EV versus a conventional car. So they're a lot more environmentally conscious and also a lot more open to change. So I think these three factors put together, you will actually have EVs accelerating going forward.
Right, I totally agree, because I mean, I'm talking about Singapore here. Whenever I do reviews, and I get a lot of questions about people asking me, Renee, I'm afraid that if when I drive the car halfway, I'll run out of energy. But the fact is, if you look at Singapore, it's only like a tiny little dot. We've got close there to almost like right now, depending about 2,000 over stations, which I think is more than enough. But the argument in Europe is, the fact that, because, like, to give you an example, Germany, they got long highways and everything. So even though if with the cars having a range of about 400 plus, they're still complaining that it's still not going to be enough, because it's all about driving styles. If I'm hard on my accelerator, I'm actually taking up more energy in the traffic conditions and everything else. So I think that's something that's still on people's minds, or weighing on people's minds. But with technology going on, with the number of brands I've worked with, some of them are actually talking about a range of like 1,000 kilometers, which I think by then should really range anxiety to rest.
I think so, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so next question. What is Singapore doing to support lower emissions and transportation?
Yeah, so I think Singapore's already doing a lot. So they have a very ambitious green plan where they're looking to reduce, actually go to net zero emissions by around 2050. And in order to do that, they actually want to reduce land transport emissions by 80%. That's a huge sort of reduction. And you can't do that without actually having an EV policy. So I think one of the key sort of goals within that is to actually make every single HDB town EV ready, which means that, as you just said, about 2,000 car parks will have EV charging points. But even more importantly, around 60,000 EV charging points will be around the country by 2030. And also, I think they've also got a very, very clear sort of plan to make 100% of the vehicles on the roads in Singapore running on clean energy by 2040. So I think that alone will also help EVs become a lot more popular. We've also seen the LTA coming out with incentives. Road tax has been reduced for EVs.
Exactly.
And also there's a lot more early adoption incentives that are given that actually runs up to about 45,000 Sing dollars. So that's quite a big chunk of incentives that are being given. So I think all of these things that Singapore is doing is to kind of support that goal of reducing emissions and getting to net zero by 2050.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of people have talked about it being an ambitious deadline, but I think to be honest, looking at how technology is, the way it's actually moving, it might even be sooner than 2050. And as you mentioned, Singapore with its green plan on going green, and I think car companies, give you an example. One of the brands that I'm working with, we're actually planning to start producing by 2025, which is very soon.
Yeah.
So as soon as this happens, car companies decide to we're going to do away with combustion engines. Then it's really not much of a choice. But if you want to drive, it's all about going green and going EVs. Absolutely. And in infrastructure-wise, I think Singapore is doing a great job. Now to my final questions: how are companies getting involved?
Yeah, I think if you look at Singapore, it's started to become an EV hub for the region. We've seen examples like NIO, the Chinese EV maker, the car we see today.
It was an excellent car, by the way, folks.
They've set up a R&D center in Singapore to research on autonomous driving as well as AI. And they've also just done a secondary listing on SGX. We've also have Hyundai, who's got an innovation center here, and they're actually looking to manufacture EVs in Singapore and sell directly, according to some media reports. And also we have VinFast, Vietnam's EV maker as well, They are setting up their headquarters in Singapore with the potential for IPO as well. So I think you're seeing more and more of these EV makers and the EV ecosystem moving to Singapore. So I think as that happens, you should be seeing a lot more opportunities, particularly in terms of investments in the private markets as well as the public market.
Right. Well, that's really a lot of useful information from Thilan, who's giving us all that little bits and bytes about EVs and in terms of technology and how the market is going to go. So once again, Thilan, thank you so much for joining us right here to give us more information. Well, I guess if you want to find out more information, we have to wait and see what Thilan comes out with next. Well, on behalf of Renee, we want to say thank you for having Thilan on board here. Thilan, thank you so much again for joining us right here.
No, thanks for having me
on our next episode.
Thank you.
Stand a chance to win up to $4,000 worth of NEO shares from the 15th of June to the 31st of August 2022. Trade SGX listed shares with Maybank Securities to qualify for the electric vehicle NEO shares lucky draw.